The lawyer's office sat above the bank on Clement Street, up a narrow staircase that creaked under every boot. The walls were paneled in dark wood gone dull with decades, and the single window at the end of the hall looked out over the feed store parking lot and the water tower beyond it. And on a clear morning, you could see the grain elevator at the edge of town, silver and enormous against the flat Tennessee sky. Nora Caldwell got there first. She always got everywhere first. 4 years of showing up before anyone else had made it a reflex she couldn't switch off even now, even for this. She climbed the stairs at 7:58 for an 8 o'clock reading and sat in one of the four folding chairs arranged in front of the lawyer's desk and set her hands in her lap and waited. The lawyer's name was Pelton. He was a thin man in his 60s with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on, and he had drawn up half the wills in Garner County over 30 years, which meant he had learned to deliver hard news in a flat, unhurried voice that left grief nowhere to grip. He set a manila folder on the desk and squared its edges twice while he waited for the others, and he did not make small talk, and Nora did not ask for any. Breck arrived 11 minutes late. She heard him on the stairs before she saw him. The particular weight of him, 230 pounds of her oldest brother moving fast and unapologetic, his phone already going as he pushed through the door. He held up one finger to the room the way he always did, the gesture of a man who believed the room could wait, and he finished whatever he was saying into the phone and slid it into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out the chair beside Nora and dropped into it. Inventory situation, he said. You know how April gets. Nora did not know how April got at the Caldwell Garden Center because she had not worked the front of the business in 6 years. That had always been the brother's side of things, the register and the customers and the delivery trucks with the family name painted on the doors. Her side had been the house on Aldercroft Road and the old man inside it. Calden came in behind Breck quieter, his cap held in both hands in front of him, the way he held it at every occasion that required stillness. He was 49 and looked older that morning, the skin under his eyes gone gray, his mouth set in the careful expression of a man rationing what he lets his face do in public. He sat without speaking and turned his cap once in his hands and set it on his knee. Pelton opened the folder. Desmond kept it simple, he said. He was clear with me about that. Said he didn't want you sitting here for an hour listening to legal language. That sounds like him, Calden said. It does, Nora said. Pelton read it in the flat voice he had perfected across 3 decades of these rooms. The garden center, the inventory, the equipment and machinery, the storefront on Route 9, and the lot it stood on. All of it to Breck Caldwell with the condition that the business remain a going concern for no fewer than 5 years from the date of inheritance. The house on Aldercroft Road, the one Desmond Caldwell had lived in for the better part of 40 years, to Calden Caldwell. The savings accounts, both of them the combined balance of which Pelton named in a voice that did not change, split equally between Breck and Calden. Then Pelton turned the page, and there was one line left. To my granddaughter Nora, he read, I leave the back 70 acres off the county road together with the standing timber and everything on it, and the brass key on the hook by the kitchen door, which she will know how to use. He set the page down. That's the whole of it. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when money has just been divided and everyone is running the arithmetic behind their eyes. Nora felt both of them look at her. She felt the careful recalculation happening in real time. Breck spoke first. He always spoke first. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man being reasonable, and his voice went gentle in the way it went gentle when he wanted something. That ground's been sitting wild for 20 years. Nobody's touched it. We can fix this right now, the 3 of us. We split the cash 3 ways instead of 2 even thirds, and you walk away with something real. That's what he would have wanted, for us to look out for each other. Nora looked at her brother. There was a version of Breck Caldwell that most people in Garner County saw and liked. He was broad-shouldered and quick with a joke, and he remembered the names of your kids. He had run the garden center well enough for 15 years, and he shook every hand in the county at least twice, and he had a smile that arrived on his face fast and warm and stayed as long as he needed it to. Nora had grown up watching that smile, which meant she had also learned to watch what lived behind it. "It's what he wrote," she said. Breck spread his hands. "He wrote it when he was 88 years old and not all the way present, Nora. You know that better than anybody. You were the one with him." "It's what he wrote," she said again. Something moved behind Breck's eyes. Not anger yet, just the door to it opening a crack. Then he closed it and nodded and stood and reached across Pelton's desk and took Nora's hand in both of his and shook it slow and warm, the handshake of a man closing a deal he was satisfied with. "Okay," he said. "Okay. You always did love the dirt more than the rest of us." Calden did not say anything. He looked at the floor and turned his cap one more time, and that was all he had for her. They filed out of this narrow office and down the creaking stairs. Breck was already on his phone by the time he hit the sidewalk. Calden caught up to Nora at her truck. He stood with his cap in his hands, working the brim the way he did when he had words backed up behind his teeth and not enough courage to let them out. What Breck said in there, he started. About splitting it 3 ways. He swallowed. "I'd have gone along with that. I know," Nora said, and she did know. That was the part that sat in her chest like a stone on the drive home. Not that Calden had failed her, because failing required a decision, and Calden had never made one in his life that Breck hadn't made first. She knew that. She had always known that. What she hadn't known or hadn't let herself know was how much it would cost to finally see it clearly. She should tell you who Desmond Caldwell was before any of the rest of it makes sense. He was 88 years old when he died, and he had built the Caldwell Garden Center out of a lean-to shed in a pickup truck back when Nora's father was still in grade school. He grew things. That was the simplest way to say it, and the truest. He grew bedding plants and nursery stock and ornamental trees, the kind people bought in spring with big plans and killed by August, and he never once made a customer feel foolish about it. He'd just sell them another one and crouch down in the aisle and show them where they went wrong. His big, rough hands turning the root ball over in the afternoon light. Nora had come to live with him when she was 6 years old. The winter her parents' marriage came apart, and neither one of them had a life with room in it for a child. The boys were older and had each other. Nora had the old man. He never made her feel like a burden dropped on his porch. The first week she was there, he handed her a small trowel and put her to work in the propagation house, and she had loved him with her whole self from that afternoon forward. He taught her to graft, to read a leaf for what was wrong underneath it, to feel soil between 2 fingers and know what it needed. He taught her patience, though he never used that word. He just made her wait for things until waiting stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like the work itself. The boys learned the front of the business. They were good at it. Breck could sell heat in July, and Calden could diagnose any small engine by sound alone. Between them, the store ran clean and turned a profit, and Desmond let them have it, because what Desmond cared about was not the register. He spent less and less time at the front as the years passed. He drifted toward the back lot and then out past the back lot, and some afternoons his truck would be gone, and nobody knew where, and he'd come back at dark with mud on his boots and that quiet look on him, satisfied about something he didn't explain. "Where do you go?" Nora asked him once. She was grown by then, Ren already 3 years old, her marriage already going wrong at the seams. "Out to the back place," he said. "Got a few things I'm tending." "Growing what?" "There's nothing out there but brush." He smiled at that, the slow smile that took its time crossing his face. "The boys sell what blooms this year," he said. "What I'm doing out back, I'm growing what somebody's going to be glad of long after I'm gone." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "You'd understand it if you came out and saw it. You're the only one of the 3 of you who would." She'd meant to go. People always mean to. But there was Ren, and then the divorce, and then the job at the hospital laundry. And there was the old man himself getting older and needing more. And the years folded over one another, and she never drove out to the back 70. The last 4 years took everything else. His knees gave out first, then his wind, then his memory in slow pieces that broke her heart worse than any of the physical losses ever could. Nora moved into the house on Aldercroft Road to look after him. She bathed him when he couldn't manage it himself and cooked the soft food he could still eat, and sat with him through the long nights when he forgot what year it was and called her by her grandmother's name. The boys came on Sundays, some Sundays. They stood in the doorway with their hands in their pockets and said, "He looked good, he looked better." And then they left before the hard parts, before the parts that required you to actually touch someone. She didn't resent them for it. That was the thing she kept having to explain to people later. She had chosen it. Somebody had to, and she was the one who could, and she would have done it twice over without a second thought. But there is a difference between choosing a thing and being seen for it. And her brothers had never once seen it. To them, she was the sister who didn't have a real job, who was living in Grandpa's house because she had nowhere better to be, who had always loved the dirt more than the rest of them. Breck had said it to her face at the lawyer's office that morning and called it a compliment. So when the will divided everything visible and left her the brush, it fit the story the whole county already had about her. It fit so perfectly that even Nora, for the better part of a week, believed it was exactly what it looked like. The funeral was on a Thursday in early April. Half the county came because Desmond Caldwell had sold half the county its first rose bush, and they filed past Nora and her brothers in the receiving line, saying the things people say. Breck shook every hand. Calden let his wife do most of the talking and stared at a point somewhere above the floral arrangements. A woman Nora half recognized from the feed store took both of her hands at the end of the line and leaned in close. "You're the one that took care of him," she said. "I heard. You're a good woman, Nora." She lowered her voice, meaning it kindly, which somehow made it land harder. "And they left you that back lot, did they?" "Well, it's still a piece of land. It's something, I suppose." "It's something," Nora agreed. She heard some version of that sentence 5 more times before the coffee and the casseroles were cleared away. Poor Nora got the brush. She gave up years of her life and they handed her the part nobody wanted. The whole town had her story figured out before the week was over, and the story was a sad one, and she was the soft-hearted fool at the center of it. The rain came in that night and stayed for 2 days. On the third morning, the sky went hard and blue and cold, and Nora woke up in the house on Aldercroft Road, knowing it was not her house anymore. Calden owned it. He hadn't said a word about her leaving. He wouldn't because Calden never said anything directly if he could avoid saying it altogether. But she could feel the clock in the walls low and certain the pressure that runs ahead of an inevitable thing. She made coffee in the kitchen where she had made Desmond's oatmeal 1,000 mornings and stood at the window looking out at the yard where he had taught her to read the soil, and she found she could not stand to be inside those walls one more hour. She did not decide to go to the back 70. She just picked up the truck keys from the hook by the door, and she picked up the brass key beside them, the fat old one, with the strip of red tape gone pink with age that had hung on that hook for as long as she could remember. She had asked him about it once years ago, and he had said it was the gate key to the back place and did not say another word about it. Burl was at the door. Burl was Desmond's walker hound, 10 or 11 years old now, gray in the muzzle and slow in the hips, and he had grieved harder than any of the humans since the old man went. He had lain at the foot of the hospital bed for the last weeks and had not been eating right since the house went quiet. But when Nora picked up the keys, his head came up off his paws, and he got himself standing with that careful, deliberate effort of an old dog who has decided something is worth the pain of moving. He went to the door and stood there and looked back at her. "You want to come," she said. He thumped his tail once against the door frame. She led him up into the cab, and they drove out of town together past the garden center with the Caldwell name on the new sign, and Breck's truck already in the lot at 7:30, past the last of the houses out onto the county road, where the pavement quit and turned to gravel. The road ran 4 miles out and got rougher the whole way, the gravel thinning to 2 ruts through old pasture, the fields giving way to wooded draws and rough country that didn't pay, and so nobody had ever fought over it. She'd forgotten how far it was. Burl rode with his nose working the gap at the top of the window, reading the air with total concentration. At the 4th mile, Nora slowed and nearly missed the gate because it was set back off the road behind a wall of brush and briars so thick and high that you would drive past it 100 times and never see it for what it was. She almost had. She had driven this road before years ago and passed this exact spot and seen nothing but the tangle of growth and kept going. She pulled over onto the grass shoulder and got out. The gate was a pipe gate, heavy gauge gone orange with rust chained shut, with a padlock that had sat through 20 Tennessee winters. She tried the brass key. It fit the padlock the way a key fits a lock that has been waiting for a specific hand, and the lock opened stiff but willing. And she had to lean into the gate and drag it through the weeds that had grown up under it to get it open wide enough to pass. Burl slipped through ahead of her. He stopped on the other side with his nose lifted, reading something off the air she couldn't reach, his whole body still and intent. Then he moved forward into the brush. Nora followed him. The brush was thick for the first 20 yards close, and tangled canes of blackberry reaching across the path, and she bent and pushed through it, ducking a low branch, stepping over a rotted post. And then the brush ended, and she came out the other side and stopped. She stopped the way you stop when something overrides your feet. It was not brush. The brush was only at the road. A screen, a curtain of wild growth someone had allowed to stand on purpose. She understood that immediately to hide what lay behind it. Because beyond that first tangled wall, the land opened up into something that did not belong to the Tennessee she had driven through to get here, did not belong to any abandoned backlot, did not belong to anything. She had a name for in her memory. Trees. Black walnut trees in rows planted by a human hand and tended there for a very long time. Their trunks rose straight and dark from a clean floor of old leaves, no undergrowth between them, no competing brush, just the rows going up the long slope and over the crest of the hill in disciplined, even ranks. The trunks were enormous. The nearest one was wider around than she could span with both arms. The bark ran in deep, dark furrows up clean bowls that didn't put out a single branch until 30 or 40 feet above her head, where the crowns spread wide and interlocking in the cold morning light. She stood at the edge of it and did not move. The grove climbed the hill in what she would later understand were waves, the oldest and tallest trees here on the lower slope near the gate, getting progressively younger as the land rose, so that the crowns up near the ridgeline were noticeably smaller. The trunks not yet as thick, the whole grove ascending like a sentence that had been added to line by line year by year, across a span of time she could not yet calculate but already felt in her chest like something enormous. She put her hand flat on the nearest trunk. The bark was cold and ridged under her palm. Up close she could see the pruning scars, dozens of them. Old wounds the tree had grown around and healed over long ago. The tissue smooth and slightly raised evidence of a saw taken to every low branch, every potential knot, year after year, to keep the wood growing straight and clean and uninterrupted all the way up. Somebody had done this, she thought, to every tree on this hillside, one limb at a time. Burl barked from somewhere above her, once not alarmed, a summons. She followed the sound up the nearest mowed lane, her boots quiet on the short grass, and she climbed between the rows into the trees. The lane ran true. That was the thing she kept coming back to as she walked. Every tree stood the same distance from its neighbor. The lanes between them were mowed clean, not by accident, not by a machine running without thought, but with the kind of attention that comes back to the same ground over and over. Decades of attention. Over the crown of the hill on the far side where the slope fell away again into a small sheltered hollow, tucked in among trees that were bigger than anything on the lower slope, she found the shack. It was a single room board and batten construction, a stovepipe through the corrugated roof, a water barrel at the corner. No bigger than a generous walk-in closet. The door was held shut by a wooden turn button worn smooth and amber by decades of the same thumb. Burl sat down in front of it and looked back at her. She turned the button and pushed the door open, and the smell hit her before anything else did. And it undid her in a way the funeral had not. In a way the lawyer's office had not. In a way nothing in that long, exhausting week had managed to do. Pipe tobacco and machine oil and old paper, and beneath those things, underneath all of them, the specific smell of his hands from when she was 6 years old, and he lifted her up to see the high propagation bench. She had to hold the door frame. The shack was one room, and every inch of it was him. A cot against the far wall with a wool blanket folded in a square. A barrel stove. A workbench under the single window with tools hung above it on nails driven into the board, and around each tool its outline drawn in pencil, so he would know at a glance what was missing. A grafting knife hung in the center of them, its bone handle gone amber with use. She would have known it anywhere. She had watched that knife take a butt off one tree and set it onto another 1,000 times when she was a girl. And books. The whole back wall was shelves floor to ceiling, and the shelves were full of notebooks. The cheap kind cardboard covers with a marbled pattern, but these had been numbered in his blocky handwriting and arranged in sequence along the shelves, 60 of them, maybe more. She took one down at random. The spine said a year on it, a year from before she was born. She opened it to the middle and found his handwriting dense and patient on every page. Dates running down the left margin, notes on rainfall and temperature records of which seedlings had taken and which had failed, rows numbered, and named quantities recorded, small sketches of leaf shape in the margins, and a whole page given over to a single grafting trial and whether it held through the first winter. She put it back and took down a newer one, and then another working forward through the decades. The story built itself in front of her without her having to ask it anything. He had started the back 70 when he was still a relatively young man. A few rows at a time, black walnut seedlings, he grew himself from nuts. He gathered off the best wild trees he could find in the county. He had nursed them through droughts and late frosts, replanted the ones the deer found, pruned them up and thinned the weakest, and kept the straightest and given the survivors room to grow, adding new ground at the top of the slope as the bottom sections matured, so that the grove climbed the hill in the waves she had seen coming up through the gate. The oldest and grandest trees down here by the shack. The youngest up over the rise, no thicker than a fence post. It was in the third or fourth notebook that the grove stopped being only trees to her. She found an entry from the autumn she turned 6. In his handwriting, patient and even, row 22 this week. 40 seedlings. Good straight nuts off the Hartley tree. Nora helped. She is going to stay with me now. She sat with that line for a long time. She kept reading. Further in a year from her late 20s, row 31 planted today. Nora had her daughter this week. A girl. Both of them fine. Started this row for the child. She had to stop. Row 31. Somewhere up that slope among the younger trees she hadn't yet walked, there was a row her grandfather had put into the ground the week Wren was born. It had been growing there in the dark through all of Wren's 16 years, and nobody had said a word about it. The most recent notebook, the last one, had entries that got shorter as the pages turned the handwriting shakier toward the end, the lines wandering off the ruled lines as his hands failed him. The final entry was dated the spring before he became too sick to drive. The letters were large and effortful, and she had to tilt the notebook toward the window light to read them. Rows 40 through 44 thinned. Sold 4 logs to the mill. Good year. Nora will know what to do with the money. She always did. Nora sat down on the cot with the notebook in her lap. She did not cry the way she had expected to cry at some point in the last week and hadn't. She sat in the smell of him and held the notebook and let it come, and Burl pressed his weight against her shins and stayed there. And outside the grove was absolutely quiet, except for a woodpecker working at something up the hill. He had built her a forest. He had built it in secret across the entire length of her life, one tree at a time, in a place nobody thought to look. And he had never once said so plainly, and she had been too busy keeping him alive to come out and see it. And he had waited her whole life for her to walk up that hill, and he had not lived to see her do it. She stayed until the light went long and gold between the trunks. Then she locked the shack with its wooden button the way he had, and drove home with one of the notebooks on the seat beside her and Burl's chin on her thigh. Wren was at the kitchen table when she came in, doing nothing, which was a 16-year-old's full-time occupation. She had her father's long bones and a standing grievance against Garner County for the crime of being small and a plan loosely held to get on a bus the day after graduation and not come back. She had loved her great-grandfather in the particular offhand way teenagers love the very old, and she had surprised herself by sobbing at the funeral. "You were gone all day," Wren said. "Uncle Brett came by. He wanted the key to Grandpa's truck. I gave it to him. He said the truck was his now. The truck's his, Nora said. It's fine. She sat down across from her daughter and set the notebook on the table between them. I went out to the back 70s, she said. The brushland, Wren said. The part they gave you, it isn't brush. Nora looked at her daughter across the kitchen table in the house that wasn't theirs anymore, in the town that had spent a week feeling sorry for her, and she told her what was out there on the other side of that rusted gate. The rows and the trunks and the height of the crowns, the shack and the grafting knife, and 60 years of notebooks. The rows planted for each of them, for Wren, for Calden, for Breck, each one recorded in his blocky hand. Wren sat very still, black walnut. He grew them for the lumber, for the wood, the best kind. Look it up, it was a small thing, a mother giving a bored teenager something to do. Nora got up and ran water into the pot for pasta and stood with her back to the room listening to the quiet sounds of the search behind her. Then the sound stopped. The kitchen went very still. Mom. Wren's voice had changed. Mom, come here. What, come here right now? Nora turned off the water and came and stood behind her daughter and looked over her shoulder at the small, bright screen. Wren had page after page pulled up, scrolling through them, her face gone pale and strange in the light of the phone. This says Wren started. She stopped. She started again. This says one tree, one veneer grade log from a mature black walnut. She swallowed. Mom, how many did you say were out there? Hundreds, Nora said. In the old sections. Maybe more. I didn't count. Wren set the phone face down on the table very carefully, as though it had gotten too heavy to hold. She looked at her mother with an expression Nora had never seen on her face before. Not excitement, not greed. Something older than both of those things. Something that looked almost like fear. We need to not tell anyone about this, Wren said. Her voice was careful and low and absolutely certain. We need to think before we tell a single person about what's out there. And that was the moment Nora would think later, the moment she should have understood what they were standing on the edge of. But she didn't. Not yet. She still thought of it as her grandfather's project. A beautiful secret. A thing about love and patience and a man who had spent his whole life proving that the slow way was the right way. The money was a number on a phone screen. It didn't feel real yet. And so she let it sit. She turned the water back on and made supper, and they ate in the kitchen that was not theirs. And outside, the Tennessee dark came down soft and full over the county road and all the way out to the gate at the back of the property that nobody had thought to open for 20 years. The grove stood in it the way it had stood through every season of her life, quiet and enormous and patient, the way her grandfather had taught her everything worth knowing was. Nora did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in the back room of the Aldercroft house, the room that had been hers since she was 6 years old and had stayed hers through the divorce and the years of laundry work and all the long nights of caring for the old man down the hall. And she stared at the ceiling and listened to the county settle into darkness around her. Burl breathed on the floor beside the bed with the deep, untroubled rhythm of an old dog who has made his peace with everything. She got up at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen and opened the oldest notebook on the table under the light above the stove. She read it cover to cover sitting in her grandfather's kitchen in the house that belonged to Calden now. And when she finished, she turned back to the beginning and read it again. The planning records and the rainfall tallies and the graph notes and the patient seasonal observations of a man who had been paying attention to a single piece of ground for longer than most people sustained interest in anything. And on the last page, after all the records, in younger handwriting than she was used to seeing from him, a single line he had written to himself and kept and never shown to anyone. A man plants walnut for grandchildren he is never going to meet. She read that line 20 times. Then she closed the notebook and sat in the dark kitchen and made a decision that surprised her with its completeness, the way real decisions sometimes arrive not at the end of deliberation, but ahead of it, already whole. She was not going to sell it. Whatever it was worth, Whatever number Wren had seen on that screen, she was not going to let a crew come onto that ground and cut down 50 years of her grandfather's life and haul it off on flatbed trucks so she could have a number in a bank account. The thought of it turned her stomach in a way she didn't need to examine or explain. She would find another way to live. She always had. What she did not know, sitting in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, was that she was not going to be allowed to make that choice quietly. She did not know yet that a number, once it gets loose in a county the size of Garner, does not stay quiet and does not stay clean and does not stay hers. She drove back out to the back 70 the next morning. She wanted to be among the trees again before the world got any further hold on things. Burl rode with his nose in the gap at the top of the window, reading the air all the way out the county road. And when she opened the gate, he was already moving up the nearest mowed lane with his old hips swinging loose and easy, as though he had walked this ground his entire life, which she now understood he probably had. She walked the lanes for the better part of an hour, reading the grove the way the notebooks had begun to teach her to read it. She was looking at it differently now, not just as a beautiful thing, but as a record, a document written in wood and time. She could see the decisions in it, which trees had been removed to give the best ones room, which rows were older by the diameter of their trunks, where the pruning had been done recently enough that the scars had not yet fully healed over, and where the old wounds were so grown around that they were barely visible in the bark. He had been making choices out here every season for 50 years. She was down in the oldest section near the shack, walking a fence line of cedar posts gone gray with age when Burl left the lane. She heard him before she saw where he had gone, the snuffling and the digging sounds coming from around the corner post at the boundary of the property. She called to him, and he ignored her, which was not unusual, but the urgency in the sound was. She went to pull him away and stopped when she got close enough to see what he was doing. The dirt at the base of the corner post had been disturbed. Not by an animal not recently, but deliberately and some time ago. The soil compacted back down after whatever was placed there, and the grass allowed to grow back over it in a rough square that was only visible now because an old dog with his nose to the ground had noticed what her eyes had missed. Nora got down on her knees beside Burl and dug with her hands. A few inches down, her fingers found metal. She worked it free carefully, loosening the soil around it, and lifted it out into the morning light. It was a flat tin box, the kind that once held fruitcake at Christmas, gone to rust at the seams, wrapped once around with a strip of cut inner tube to keep the moisture out. She peeled the rubber away and worked the lid with her thumbnail until it gave. Inside, resting on top of a folded piece of oilcloth, was an envelope. His handwriting was on the front. That blocky, deliberate hand she had been reading all night in the notebooks, the hand that had recorded 50 years of this ground. The envelope said one word on the front, her name, and then beneath it, in the same hand, a line that stopped her cold in the April morning. For Nora. To be opened after the others have taken what they wanted. She sat down in the dirt beside the corner post with the tin in her lap, and the dog leaning against her, and she opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. 3 of them, covered front and back, the lines slightly crooked, the way his writing went near the end when his hands had begun to fail him, but his mind was still entirely his own. She read them through once fast, her eyes jumping ahead. Then she made herself go back to the beginning and read them slowly, and she heard his voice in every sentence, the way you hear a voice you have known your whole life. Nora, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the boys have done what I always knew they would do, and you have found the back 70 and walked up the hill and seen it. Good. Now you know. I want to tell you why I did it this way. It is going to look unfair to people on the outside. I do not want you carrying that weight. I love your brothers. I need you to know that first. But I have watched them their whole lives, and I know what they reach for. Breck especially. Give that boy $1 today or a tree that pays out long after he is dead, and he will take the dollar every time and feel like he won. So I let him. I gave the boys the store, in the house, in the bank accounts, the things a man can see and count and spend this season, because that is what they are built for. An old man should not fight his own grandsons over what they cannot help being. But you were the one who stayed. You followed me into the propagation house when you were 6 years old, and you never once left. You are the only one of the three who ever loved a thing for being slow. Money runs out in a season. A walnut tree makes you wait 50 years, and then it pays the grandchildren you are never going to meet. I wanted to leave you the one thing that would ask you to keep doing what you already knew how to do. There is a man named Arden Mace. He is a forester, retired state service, lives out on Bleecker Road past the grain elevator. He is the only living person besides me who knows what is on that ground. Call him. He will tell you straight what you have, and he will not cheat you. He helped me with the paperwork years back, and he knows the trees. Do not let anyone talk you into cutting the whole stand at once and walking away with a check. That is not what it is for. You take a few of the ripe ones each year, the ones that are crowding their neighbors and ready to come down, and you sell those and leave the rest standing and growing. That is the whole secret. That is the only secret I ever had worth keeping. You are not a poor woman, Nora. You have never been a poor woman. A person is never poor as long as they have something in the ground that is still growing. You remember I told you that I am sorry I could not say this to your face. I was always better with trees than with words, but I knew exactly what I was doing when I wrote your name on that deed, and I knew exactly who I was giving it to, and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. It is yours. You earned it before you even knew it was there. Grandpa. She sat in the dirt by that corner post for a long time. He had seen her. That was the thought that filled her up and ran over the edges. Her whole life she had been the one nobody quite saw, the helper, the one who stayed because she had nowhere better to be, the one who loved the dirt more than the rest of them. And the old man had seen her clear as window glass, had seen her so clearly that he had spent his entire life building her a secret out of trees and time and patience, and he had trusted her with the one thing in his life he had loved most, and he had not lived to see her face when she found it. She folded the pages back along their creases and put them in her jacket pocket and walked back down through the grove to her truck. That afternoon, she did what the letter told her to do. She found Arden Mace in the county phone book, an actual phone book in the bottom of a kitchen drawer, and she called the number. The man who answered had a slow, careful voice that told her immediately he was someone who thought before speaking, which was a quality she had come to value above almost everything else. When she told him whose granddaughter she was, the line went quiet. Desmond Caldwell, he said finally. Lord, I heard he passed. I should have come to the service. He asked her if she had found the grove. She told him she had and that there was a letter and that the letter told her to call him. There was a pause on his end, the particular pause of a man absorbing something he had wondered about for a long time. I'll come out tomorrow morning, he said. You meet me at the gate. He was there at 8 with a clipboard and a diameter tape and an instrument he called a height meter, and he walked the lanes for 3 solid hours while Nora followed him, and he said almost nothing the entire time. He would stop at a tree and put the tape around it and read the measurement and write it down. He would step back and sight up the trunk with one eye closed. Now and then he would put his hand flat against the bark and hold it there for a moment, the same gesture she had made the morning before, and she understood that he was reading something she did not yet have the language for. When they reached the oldest section down near the shack, the trees with trunks she could not get her arms around, he stopped walking altogether. He stood looking up into the crowns for a long while without writing anything down. You know what these are, he said. It was not quite a question. Black walnut, Nora said. He grew them for the wood. He didn't just grow walnut. Arden shook his head slowly, still looking up. Any fool can stick a nut in the ground and walk away. Your grandfather grew veneer. You see how there's not a branch on these boles for 30, 40 feet up. That is not nature doing that. That is a man out here with a pole saw every spring for decades, removing every limb before it could put a knot in the log. Pruning, thinning, selecting the straightest, and cutting the rest so the good ones had room and light. He did everything right. Everything. For half a century. He looked at her, and he never told a soul, and he never sold but a handful to keep the rest growing. He was quiet a moment. I consulted for him once or twice back in the early years. He knew more than I did by then. I just signed the paperwork. He turned and looked at her directly for the first time since they had come through the gate. "A timber buyer came out here," he said. "Good while back, maybe 15 years ago. Offered your grandfather serious money to cut the whole stand flat. I was standing right there when the man made his pitch. Your grandfather heard him out polite as you please. Then he said, 'No thank you, these aren't ready, and anyhow they're not for me.' Buyer asked him who they were for then. Your grandfather just smiled and didn't answer. He paused. I always wondered what he meant by that. I guess now I know." Nora asked him what it was worth. She hated to ask it. The letter had told her it was not the point, and she believed that with her whole self. But she had a daughter with no house under her, and she was 44 years old, and she needed to know what she was standing on. Arden took his cap off and pushed his hand back through his gray hair and put his cap back on. "Folks drive past a stand like this their whole lives and call it weeds," he said. "Your grandfather knew to the inch what he had. He told her the plain way without theater or hesitation, the way a man tells the truth when he respects the person he is telling it to. The best of the old butt logs, the bottom 16 feet of the biggest and cleanest trees down here on the lower slope, those would bring several $1,000s each at the right mill. A few of the very finest considerably more. There were, by his rough count that morning, something over 300 trees of harvest size in the older sections, with the best of them here below the shack, and hundreds more behind them in the middle and upper sections coming on year by year. A crop already planted that she would never have to plant herself. Managed the way Desmond had laid it out, taking a cut of the ripe ones each season and leaving the rest standing, the ground would pay her better than most people's retirement every year for the rest of her life, and still be standing for Wren when she was gone. And if she were to sell the whole thing at once to be cut flat and hauled off the standing timber, would appraise for more than the garden center and the house on Aldercroft Road and every dollar in Desmond's bank accounts combined, and it would not be close. Nora sat down on the chopping block by the shack because her legs had decided they were done holding her up. Her brothers had carried off everything they could see and shaken her hand over the part they couldn't see. And the part they couldn't see was worth more than all of it together. Not a little more, considerably more. She sat with that fact in the morning light and looked up the long slope at the rows climbing into the distance, all those thousands of straight dark trunks, and what she felt was not triumph. It was closer to grief, sharp and clean. Because the man who would most have wanted to see her face at this exact moment had been 4 days in the ground when she first walked through that gate. "I'm not selling it," she told Arden. "Not the whole thing. I'm going to do it the way he said. Take a few, leave the rest." The forester looked at her for a moment, and something in his weathered face settled. "Then I'll help you do it right," he said. He'd want that. She drove home that afternoon and told Wren the whole of it. The letter and the tin box and the number Arden had put on it. Wren listened without once reaching for her phone, which had never happened in the history of a conversation about anything. "So we're not selling it," Wren said when she had finished. "We're going to manage it. Take what's ripe, leave the rest growing." Wren turned her glass on the table. "Row 31, she said, "the one he planted the week I was born. Still up there on the hill. I want to find it. We'll find it." That was the end of the quiet part. By the end of that week, the shape of something had gotten loose in Garner County, the way things always got loose in a county that size. Not the truth, not the real number, but the outline of it. A forester's truck parked at the old gate most of a morning. A man with a diameter tape walking the back lot. Somebody said timber. Somebody's brother-in-law worked at the mill up in Crestfield. The brushland that everyone had spent a week pitying Nora for receiving had become by Friday evening the brushland that everyone had an opinion about. It got to Breck. Breck had been sitting with a calculator and a stack of bills he had not let anyone see. The garden center looked fine from Route 9, the sign new, the lot full, the delivery trucks clean. But Breck had spent the last several years borrowing against it in increments that had seemed manageable one at a time and were catastrophic in aggregate. A second mortgage that nobody in the family knew about. A line of credit stretched to its limit. The estate money, his share and the share he had persuaded Calden to let him access early, had bought him breathing room. Breathing room was not going to be enough. The news from the bank 2 days after the will reading had been the kind of news that a man hears and then sits in his truck in the parking lot for 40 minutes not turning the key. And then the rumor about the back 70 reached him, and the small, cold thought that had snagged in the back of his mind the morning of the will reading stopped being a thought and started being the only thing he thought about. He came to the Aldercroft house on a Sunday evening. He came alone, no called in, and he brought a six-pack he set on the kitchen table like a peace offering, and he sat down across from Nora with a smile that worked on most people in Garner County, and he kept his voice easy. "I hear you had Arden Mace out at the back place," he said. "Forrester. Funny kind of visit for a piece of brush." "Grandpa planted it," Nora said. "It's walnut. He's been growing it for years." Walnut. Breck turned this over. His eyes were doing the math she could see them doing even behind the easy expression. And Mace made it sound like it's worth something. She could have stopped there. She thought about stopping there. But Breck would know the truth inside a month, regardless of what she said. And she had never been any good at lying, and so she told him a version that was true and small. "Good timber," she said. "I'm going to manage it. Take a little off it here and there over time." "Take a little off it," he repeated. The smile stayed on his mouth, but it migrated away from his eyes, and what was left underneath it was something she recognized. The specific expression of a man who has realized he made a mistake and is calculating how to undo it. He leaned forward with both hands flat on the table. "Come on," he said. "We're family. How much are we talking here? Why does it matter, Breck?" And there it came. The thing he had driven over on a Sunday evening to say, dressed up first in ease, and then in reason, and now in its actual shape. Because that was Grandpa's land, he said. The whole estate. And Grandpa, God love him, he wasn't exactly all there at the end, was he? You'd know better than anybody. You were the one over there with him every day. A lawyer looking at a will that leaves the most valuable piece of the whole property to one grandkid while cutting the other two out. A lawyer might wonder about that. Might wonder if the old man fully understood what he was signing. Might wonder if somebody was in a position to influence what he put in that document. The blood went slow and cold in her veins. "You're saying I talked him into it." "I'm not saying anything." He spread his hands, the wronged, reasonable man, a gesture she had seen 100 times. "I'm saying it might look that way to people who don't know you like I do. I'm saying a lawyer in the city might have questions." "I fed him," Nora said. Her voice did not rise, which seemed to unsettle him more than rising would have. "I bathed him. I sat up with him when he didn't know what year it was and called me by Grandma's name. I did that for 4 years while you stood in the doorway on Sundays and said he looked good. And now you want to come into this kitchen and tell me he didn't know his own mind." She looked at him across the table without any expression he could read. "You can't have it both ways, Breck. Either he was sound enough to leave you the business and the money, or he wasn't sound enough to leave me the land. Which is it?" He was quiet for a moment. The smile was gone entirely now. "I'm just saying we're family," he said finally. "Family looks out for each other. That's all he ever wanted from us." Nora stood up and took the 5 unopened cans of beer off the table and set them back in the cardboard carrier and held it out to him. "Go home, Breck." He took the carrier. He stood at the door for a long moment with the look of a man who has more to say and has decided against saying it. Then he drove away with more speed than the gravel called for. She stood at the kitchen window and watched his taillights disappear down Aldercroft Road, and then she stood there a while longer in the dark. She had known it was coming. She had felt it the same way you feel a change in the weather before the sky shows it. What she had not fully calculated was how fast Breck would move once he decided to move. 3 days later, Arden Mace called her. He was careful on the phone the way a man is careful when he has information he doesn't want to mishandle. He told her that a company called Stratton Timber out of western Kentucky had been in contact with him asking questions about a private walnut stand in Garner County, Tennessee. He told her that the inquiry had apparently come through a third party who represented himself as having an ownership interest in the property. Nora was quiet on the phone for a moment. "He signed something," she said. "It wasn't a question." "A letter of intent," Arden said. "It's not binding on its own, But if he files a legal challenge to the will at the same time and gets a court to put a hold on the property while the challenge is heard, the company could use the letter to establish a claim. It could tie up that land for a long time, Nora. Long enough to cost you money you don't have for lawyers. Long enough to make settling feel like the easier choice. She understood the shape of it completely. Breck did not need to win in court. He only needed to make fighting expensive enough that giving him a piece felt cheaper than the alternative. She sat with that for the rest of the evening. She did not call a lawyer. That was what Breck expected her to do, to go looking for someone to stand between her and the problem, to outsource the fight the way she had never been allowed to outsource anything else. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with the notebook stacked in front of her, and she thought about what her grandfather had done every single season for 50 years when the problem was a tree that needed its limbs taken off. He had gone out there himself with a saw and done it. One limb at a time, not dramatic, just necessary. The next morning, she drove to the Stratton Timber Regional Office in Crestfield. She drove alone. She wore the same clothes she wore to walk the grove. She did not call ahead. The office was in a low brick building off the interstate. Nothing remarkable about it. A reception desk in a conference room visible through a glass partition, and two men in the conference room who looked up when she came in. She asked for the project manager handling the Garner County inquiry. They made her wait 12 minutes in a chair beside the reception desk, and she waited without reading anything on her phone and without fidgeting the way her grandfather had taught her to wait, because he had never distinguished between waiting for a graft to take and waiting for anything else. The project manager was a compact man in his 40s named Harwell, who shook her hand with the automatic firmness of someone who shook a lot of hands and had learned to seem present while thinking about something else. She sat down across from him, and she put a bound copy of 40 pages of her grandfather's notebooks on the table between them. My grandfather, she said, documented every tree on that property for 50 years. She said it in the same flat, unhurried voice that Pelton, the lawyer, used when he read wills, the voice that leaves grief and anger nowhere to grip. Every planning date, every pruning record, every decision. She put her hand on the bound copy. The will was written by a man who was legally competent and independently minded, and whose mental clarity at the time of signing is documented in his own handwriting through the final season he was able to work. If Stratton Timber proceeds with this acquisition, I will ensure that every page of this record is submitted to the court as evidence of my grandfather's intent in his capacity. And I will contact every conservation organization, forestry school, and regional timber trade publication I can find to make certain they understand that the acquisition of this grove is being contested by the heir to whom it was legally left. She paused. Or Stratton can withdraw the letter of intent by end of business tomorrow, and this stays between us. Harwell looked at the bound copy on the table. He looked at her. He picked up the copy and turned it over in his hands and set it back down. He did not say much after that. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. She drove back to Garner County and made supper and did not tell Wren where she had been. By the following afternoon, Arden had called to let her know that Stratton Timber had formally withdrawn from the inquiry. Breck called that evening. His voice had a quality she had not heard from him in a very long time. Something stripped of the smooth surface. Something that sounded like the actual man underneath all the years of performance. She let him speak. She did not argue, and she did not console him. She told him the land was hers and would remain hers, and that he was welcome to pursue a legal challenge if he chose to, and that when he finished paying a city lawyer to read 60 notebooks, he should let her know how that went. He hung up without a clean ending. She thought that would be the end of it for a while, that Breck would retreat into his pride and his debts, and she would have a season of peace in which to begin doing what the letter had told her to do. She was wrong about the peace, though not in the direction she expected. 8 days after she drove to Crestfield, called and knocked on her door at 9:30 on a weeknight. She had not seen him since the day of the will reading. He stood on the porch with his cap in his hands, and his face looked like a man who had not slept properly in months. And she understood before he opened his mouth that whatever he had come to say was not about the land. She let him in and put a plate in front of him that he did not touch. Wren looked at his face and took herself to her room without being asked. "I have to tell you something," Calden said, "and you're going to be angry, and you've got every right. He turned his cap once on the table. Merritt is sick, he said. He said it quietly, the way you say a thing you have been carrying for a long time and have finally put down where someone else can see it. Real sick. He's been up at Vanderbilt Children's more than he's been home this year. Nora sat down slowly. Leukemia, Calden said. They caught it early enough, the doctors say the treatment is working. But the bills. He pressed his mouth shut and got himself together before he continued. We lost our insurance when the plant closed. The new coverage is garbage and the gaps in it are enormous. I have been drowning for months and I did not tell anyone because I did not know how to say it without it sounding like an excuse for what happened at the lawyer's office. He looked up at her finally. I took my share of that money because I needed it for Merritt's treatment, he said. And when Breck asked me to let him access it early, I went along with it because I was already so far in that I thought maybe his plan would work and we'd come out the other side and I could pay the rest of Merritt's bills without anybody having to know any of it. He swallowed. It didn't work. The money's gone. The bills are still there. And I stood in that lawyer's office and watched them hand you a piece of ground everyone said was worthless. And I did not say a word because I needed my piece too badly to speak up. And I have not slept right since. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the Tennessee night was full and dark. And somewhere down the road, a dog was barking at something in the middle distance. Nora looked at her brother, the brother who had always stood in doorways, who had always let Breck make the decisions and gone along because going along was easier than choosing. She had been angry at him for it her whole life, and she still was sitting in that kitchen, and she was also looking at a man whose 7-year-old boy was in a hospital in Nashville and who had been carrying that alone through the worst months of his life. Why didn't you tell me, she said. Calden, I was right there. Because you'd already given everything, he said. 4 years of your life. How was I going to come to you for more when you'd already given everything and gotten the least? She was quiet for a moment. How is he, she said. Merritt. Tonight. How is he right now? Calden's face came apart and put itself back together. Better than he was, he said, finally. The last round of treatment took. He's home this week. First thing he asked when he got home was whether he could come see Grandpa's dog. Bring him out, Nora said. When he's strong enough, bring him out to the Grove. There's a row out there your grandfather planted the week Merritt was born. He marked all of us. You too. Calden shook his head slowly. Not refusal. Something closer to wonder at the dimensions of a thing he was only beginning to understand. I drove past that gate my whole life, he said. We all did, Nora said. Except him. She sat with that for a moment. The brother who had grabbed the money was drowning to keep a child alive. The brother who had grabbed everything else was drowning to maintain a lie. And the old man who had seen all of it coming with the particular clarity of someone who has watched a family for 88 years, had handed the one person who asked for nothing and made no fuss. The only thing he owned with enough life left in it to help any of them. If she was willing to do it his way and not theirs. Come out to the Grove on Saturday, she said. You and Breck both. Before anyone makes any more decisions, I want both of you to stand in at once. Calden looked at her. He won't come, he said. You get him there, she said. That part's on you. Calden got him there. She did not ask how, and Calden did not explain. Some negotiations between brothers happen in a language that excludes everyone else. And whatever Calden said to Breck in whatever phone call or driveway conversation had preceded Saturday morning, the result was that both trucks pulled up to the rusted gate at 8 o'clock with 20 minutes between them, Calden first and then Breck. And the three of them stood together on the gravel shoulder of the county road in the cool April morning for the first time since they were children, running the back lot of the garden center. Breck looked like a man who had decided to be somewhere and was not going to let his face admit the cost of the decision. He had his jacket collar up against the morning chill and his hands in his pockets, and he nodded at Nora when he got out of the truck, a single nod that carried no warmth and no hostility, just the particular blankness of someone holding themselves very carefully together. Nora unlocked the gate. She led them through the screen of brush at the road, the same tangle of briars and cane that had hidden the Grove from the county road for 50 years, and she heard both of them slow behind her as the brush closed in, and then she pushed through the last of it and came out into the open and turned and watched her brother's faces. Calden stopped first. He stood at the edge of the grove and looked up the long slope at the ranks of trees climbing toward the ridgeline, their dark trunks rising straight and enormous from the clean leaf floor, the crowns spreading high and interlocking in the morning light. And his face did the thing faces do when they encounter something that exceeds the category they had prepared for it. Breck stopped 3 steps behind him. He stood there in the silence of it, and he looked. Not the quick professional assessment of a man pricing inventory, not the calculating look she had seen in the lawyer's office and across her kitchen table. He looked the way people look at things that are simply too large for the usual mental machinery to process quickly. The rows going up and over the hill, the trunks too wide for a man's arms, the height of the crowns against the pale April sky, the silence, which was not the silence of emptiness, but of something that had been growing in one place for a very long time. He did all this, Breck said. His voice had come out differently than he intended it to, quieter and less certain, and he did not try to correct it. All of it, Nora said. While you and I were running the register and answering the phone and making deliveries, he'd take the truck out here alone and walk these rows with a pole saw and take off every low branch one at a time so the wood would grow straight and clean all the way up. He did that every spring, for 50 years. He never told anyone. He never sold but a handful. Breck walked a little way up the nearest mowed lane, his boots finding the short grass between the rows, and he put his hand on the nearest trunk, the way she had put her hand on it the first morning. He stood there with his palm flat against the bark, and she watched something move across his face that she had not seen there since their grandmother's funeral 30 years ago, when he was still young enough to let people see him feel things. I called it brush, he said. At the lawyer's office. I shook your hand over it like I was doing you a favor. He laughed, and it was the most honest sound she had heard from him in years, because there was nothing in it but a man recognizing himself clearly and not liking what he saw. He asked me to come out here once, Breck said. He was looking up the slope, not at her. Way back right after I took over the front of the store. He said, Breck, ride out to the back place with me this Saturday. I want to show you something. He stopped. I told him I had a delivery, that I'd come another time. He pressed his palm harder against the bark. I never came another time, he said. He never asked me again. I figured he just wanted company while he walked around looking at his weeds. I had no idea he was going to show me this. He stopped asking all of us, Nora said. I think he decided that whoever was meant to understand it would find it on their own when the time came. And you found it because we handed you the part nobody wanted. She let that sit between them in the cool air under the trees. She let it sit long enough to be real and not long enough to become a wound she was reopening on purpose. That's the only reason I drove out here, she said. If you had split it 3 ways in that office like you offered, I'd have taken the money and gone home and never laid eyes on a single one of these trees. Breck turned and looked at her directly for the first time that morning. The arithmetic of that was visible on his face. The particular calculation of a man understanding not just what he lost, but the specific mechanism by which he lost it, the exact gesture of his own hand handing it away. You can't take it back, Nora said. I am not going to let you take it back, but you can hear what I've decided. She told them both standing in the grove with the morning light coming down through the crowns around them. She told them she was not selling it to be cut flat, not for Breck, not for anyone, not for any number a mill or a timber company might put on a table. She told them that the day a logging crew came in here and leveled 50 years of their grandfather's patience so they could split a check 3 ways was the day she had thrown away the only real thing the family had left. She told them about Arden's plan, the first cut of 30 ripe trees in the spring, the ones crowding their neighbors and ready to come down the money that would come from those, and what she intended to do with it first. Merritt's bills, Calden said. He was not asking. Every last one of them, Nora said, before anything else. Calden put his hand over his eyes and stood that way for a moment, and then took it away. Breck was quiet. She could see him working through it, the numbers and the pride and the long habit of reaching for whatever was closest and most immediate. And underneath all of that, something she had not seen from him in a very long time, something that might have been the man he was before the business became a front he was maintaining instead of a thing he was running. "I don't have the kind of time this place runs on," he said. "The bank's not going to wait for a walnut tree to come ripe." "I know it," Nora said, "and I'm not going to let you go under either. That's not what he would have wanted, and it's not what I want." She looked at her oldest brother in the grove their grandfather had built for all of them, whether they deserved it or not. "But I can't cut this whole stand down to cover a debt you ran up keeping up a front that was never real, Breck. If I do that, the grove is gone, and the business goes under in 2 more bad seasons anyway, because the business was never the problem." You know what the problem was? He knew. She could see that he knew, and that knowing it was the hardest thing he had done in years. "The store can be what it actually is," she said. "Smaller, honest, a real operation instead of a performance of one. And you come out here and work with us. A real share for real work paid out slow every year the way everyone else gets paid. It won't save you by fall, but it might save you by the long way around if you're willing to take the long way." She held his eyes. "You already took the grown part," she said. "The store and the house and the money in the accounts. You took all of that at the lawyer's office, and you've spent it, and it's gone." She opened her hand toward the trees climbing the hill. "This is the part that isn't finished yet, and I'm keeping it, not to be rich from, to tend." Breck looked up the slope for a long time. She watched him look at the young trees at the top of the hill, no thicker than a fence post, the ones Desmond had planted in his final productive years, knowing he would be underground before they were worth a single board foot. And whatever he saw up there in the thin upper canopy in those young trees that would not be ready in his lifetime, or likely even in Nora's, it took something out of him. Not the fight exactly. Something older and more stubborn than the fight. "I have to think about it," he said. "That's all I can tell you. I have to think." He walked back down through the grove and through the screen of brush to his truck without another word, and Nora let him go because she had said the true thing and the rest of it was his to carry. Calden stayed. He stood beside her in the quiet for a long while, looking up the slope, and she could see him doing something she had never seen him do in all the years of watching him stand in doorways and let other people decide. He was making a decision for himself slowly and without drama, the way a man decides something he has been working toward without knowing it. "He won't say yes for a while," Calden said finally. "You know how he is. I know how he is. But I watched his face up there." He paused. "That's the closest I've seen him to honest in years." "It's a start," Nora said. "Grandpa took 50 years to grow a tree. I suppose we can give Breck a season or two." That afternoon, after Calden drove home, Nora went back up into the grove alone. Except she was not alone because Wren had driven out on her own and was waiting by the shack with Burl at her feet and the grafting knife in her hands turned over carefully, studying the bone handle gone amber with use. "Show me how he picked them," Wren said. "Which ones to take and which ones to leave. You said he took the ripe ones. How did he know?" So Nora showed her. They walked the oldest section together, the big trees down near the shack, and Nora put her hand on the trunks, the way Desmond had put his hand on them, the way he had taught her without ever naming what he was teaching her, and she read them one by one. This one was ready its work in the ground, mostly done crowding the trees beside it. That one had 10 more years of growing in it and room to do it. She moved through the rows with her daughter behind her. And the reading came back to her the way physical knowledge comes back not from thinking about it, but from the hands doing what they already knew. She found the first tree down near the shack. It was a great, clear, bold walnut, the largest on the lower slope. Its trunk wider than her arms could span the bole, rising clean and uninterrupted to the first branch 40 feet overhead. Arden had already marked it with a ribbon of orange tape around the trunk. She took the grafting knife from Wren's hands and opened the blade and cut a small blaze in the bark at eye level, the mark she had watched her grandfather make 100 times to say he had chosen a tree. The wood under the bark was pale and clean and wet. Alive. "That's the first one," Nora said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "That one is for Merritt." Wren put her hand flat on the bark beside the blaze. The two of them stood there in the long gold light with Burl at their feet, and the whole grove rising around them, and the ridgeline going dark against the sky above. And neither of them said anything for a while, because there was nothing to say that the trees were not already saying. Spring came the way spring comes in Tennessee, fast and wet, and then suddenly warm, and with it came Arden and his marking crew in a log truck that cut two ruts through the brush at the gate and up into the lower section of the grove. Nora had asked that the road go in as lightly as possible, and Arden had honored that, and the ruts were narrow and the damage to the root zones minimal. And the first morning the crew worked, she was there at first light, standing in the lane beside the flag trees with her coffee and Burl beside her. 30 trees came down that week, the ripe ones, the ones Arden had marked, and she had confirmed the ones crowding their neighbors and ready to give way so the rest could spread and keep growing. The crew was careful. Arden had chosen them for that. Each tree came down along the lane it had stood beside, and the sawyer bucked the logs cleanly, and the skidder moved them out without tearing up the ground. And when the week was done, the gaps in the grove were smaller than she had expected. The light came down differently in those places, and the crowns of the neighboring trees were already beginning, she would swear it, to lean slightly toward the new space. She was there the morning they took the first one. The great clear walnut she had blazed with her grandfather's knife, the one she had chosen for merit. The sawyer made his cuts with the efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times. And when the big tree came down, it came down slow and almost gentle, rotating as it fell and laying itself along the lane with a sound that moved through the ground and up through the soles of her boots. The sawyer bucked the bottom log free, the clear 16 feet that Desmond had spent decades pruning toward, and rolled it so the fresh-cut face pointed at the sky. The wood was not brown. She had known intellectually that black walnut heartwood was not brown. She had read it in Arden's literature, but knowing a thing and seeing it are different experiences. The heart of that log was a deep chocolate shot through with threads of purple and seams of gold, the grain tight and even and absolutely clear. Not a knot in the 16 feet, not a single interruption in the tight parallel lines that ran from one end of the log to the other. The sawyer stood beside it with his hands on his hips and did not say anything for almost a minute. "That is as fine a butt log as I have seen come off any ground in this state," Arden said quietly, standing beside her. "Your grandfather grew that on purpose for this exact morning." Nora laid her hand flat on the cut face of the log on the dark grain that held the morning light and gave it back, changed, and she did not say anything because there was not a word in her that was equal to what she was feeling, which was grief and gratitude and something beyond both of them that she did not have a name for. The best of the butt logs went to a mill in Robertson County that Arden had worked with for 30 years and trusted. The check came back 2 weeks later. Nora sat down at the kitchen table when she opened it. She read it twice. Then she sat with it for a long time before she did anything else. Then she called the billing department at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and she paid every outstanding balance on Merritt Caldwell's account. Every one of them, the whole accumulated weight of the past year, cleared to zero before she let herself think about anything else or spend $1 on anything else. Calden called her that evening after the hospital called him. He did not say much. She could hear that he was outside and that he had stepped away from the house to make the call, and that he was holding himself together with the particular effort of a man who has been strong for a long time in front of people who needed him to be. "You didn't have to do it all at once," he said. She said nothing. "Merritt asked if he could come see Burl this weekend," Calden said. His voice had changed. "He said Grandpa's dog. He calls him Grandpa's dog." "Bring him out Saturday," Nora said. "We'll find his row." What was left of the first cut's proceeds went into an account she did not touch that week. A real roof on the house on Aldercroft Road, which Calden needed and would not have asked for. A small reserve set aside the way Desmond would have done it, patient and unspent, waiting for what came next. The grove stood. All those hundreds of trunks still on the hill, barely changed by what had come down, already growing into the new gaps the harvested trees had left behind. Her grandfather had been right about everything. You didn't have to choose between this year and next year. You only had to be patient enough to take a little and leave the rest, and almost no one was. That was the whole secret. He had left it to the one grandchild who already knew how to live it. Merritt came on a Saturday in late May, thin, but with color coming back into his face. His hair still short from the treatment, but his eyes, the eyes of a boy who had decided he was going to be all right. He ran the mowed lanes of the grove with Burl loping behind him, the old dog moving faster than he had in months, something in the familiar ground waking up his legs. Calden walked beside Nora through the older trees, quieter than she had seen him, reading the grove in a way he had not tried to read it the first time he came. Wren found row 31 that afternoon. She had been looking for it since the first day she heard about it, and she found it in the middle section of the grove where the trees were perhaps 30 years old, their trunks a foot and a half in diameter, their crowns up and spreading, but not yet at the full height of the lower grove. She counted from the lane markers and found the row and walked it and stopped at a tree near the center of it. This one, she said. She put her hand on the trunk. This is mine. It's yours, Nora said. Wren looked up into the crown a long way up the branches spreading against the blue May sky. How long until it's ready? Arden says 20 years, maybe more. Depends on the season. So I'd be your age. About that. Wren looked at the tree for a while longer. Grandpa planted it the week I was born, she said, and never said anything about it. He never said anything about any of it, Nora said. He just kept coming out here and doing the work. That was the week Wren stopped talking about the bus. She didn't announce it. There was no conversation about it, no declaration that she was changing her plans. The plan simply went quiet and then went away the way a plan goes away when something real has replaced it. She started spending her Saturdays in the grove with a notebook Arden had given her, learning to read the trees from the ground up, soil composition and canopy structure, and the markers that told you a tree was approaching harvest readiness. She started saying things like crown ratio and site index. She started asking Arden questions that took him a moment to answer, which was not something many people managed. One evening, she told Nora about a forestry management program at the state university. She said it carefully as though admitting something she was still deciding whether to be embarrassed about. I could actually learn to run this properly, she said. Know what I'm doing instead of guessing. She picked at the table. Is that stupid? Wanting to stay here? Everybody leaves. Your great-grandfather stayed his whole life, Nora said. And he grew the most beautiful thing in 4 counties out behind a gate nobody thought to open. There are worse things to do with a life than stay and tend something. Wren nodded slowly, not looking up. He knew I'd find it, she said. Didn't he? He knew somebody would eventually. He knew you'd find it specifically, Nora said. He planted your row. The summer came down hard and dry on Garner County, and the grove stood through it the way it had stood through every summer for 50 years, its root systems deep and established and indifferent to the heat that dried out everything shallower. Nora walked the lanes most mornings with her coffee and Burl reading the grove the way the notebooks had taught her, seeing the decisions in it that her grandfather had made year by year across half a century. She was learning to see what he had seen, which was not a stand of timber, but a conversation across time. A man talking to people he would never meet about what mattered and how to take care of it. The bank called Breck's loan in August. It went the way Calden had said it would go, the way Nora had seen coming since the morning in Pelton's office when she watched Breck's eyes do the arithmetic on the back 70. The second mortgage on the garden center was called first, then the primary note, and the building on Route 9 went back to the bank by the end of September. Breck sold the inventory and the trucks, and what equipment he could liquidate, and what was left when the dust settled was small and honest. A fraction of the business he had been performing for years stripped down to what it actually was. The strange thing, the thing that surprised her when she heard about it from Calden, was that it seemed to take a weight off him. Not all the weight. The humiliation of it was real, and she did not minimize it to herself or to anyone who asked. But the specific weight of maintaining the performance, of keeping the front up, of running every morning trying to stay ahead of what he already knew was inevitable, that weight came off when the inevitable arrived and settled into fact. A man stops running when there is nothing left to run from. He came to the grove in early October. She was mowing a lane in the middle section when she heard a truck at the gate and looked down the hill and saw it was his. She shut off the mower and watched him get out and stand beside the truck for a long moment. Then he walked through the brush to the gate, which she had left unlocked since the spring, and he pushed through and came up the lane toward her. He looked older than August. He looked like someone who had stopped performing and had not yet figured out who he was without it. Calden says you could use another hand with the young trees, he said. He could not quite look at her when he said it. He was looking at the grove around him, at the middle section where the trees were not yet enormous, but were clearly the work of the same patient hand that had made everything below them. She studied him for a moment. Leniency would have been easy. She was not a cruel person, and she had never wanted to be, and she understood the difference between a man who had done wrong things from weakness and a man who had done wrong things from malice. Breck was the former, always had been, and she had known it her whole life, even when she was most angry at him. But easy leniency was not what either of them needed, and it was not what the grove required of anyone who worked it. Pay is slow, she said, the same as everyone. Breck nodded. He looked up the hill at the older trees, the enormous ones on the lower slope that he had finally seen up close in April and had not been able to look away from. I don't know how to do any of this, he said. I only ever knew how to sell things. Then you'll learn. She picked up the handle of the mower. Arden taught Grandpa some of it. Grandpa taught me. I can teach you. It isn't complicated. It's just slow. She looked at him across the mowed lane. The slow part is the only thing I can't teach you, Breck. You have to want it yourself. I'm trying, he said, and it was the most unguarded thing she had heard from him in 30 years. Not a pitch, not a performance of humility designed to get something. Just a man telling the truth about where he was. I don't know yet if I'm any good at it, but I'm trying. She started the mower. He fell in behind her and helped rake the cut grass out of the lane. And that was how the first afternoon went, without ceremony or resolution, because those things were beside the point. He came back the following Saturday and the one after that. Arden started showing him the basics of pruning the young trees in the upper section. The pole saw work that needed doing every spring, the same patient work Desmond had done alone through every spring of his adult life. Breck was bad at it in the way that capable people are bad at things that require them to move slower than their instincts want them to. He wanted to take too much at once. He wanted to see a visible result by the end of the day. Arden kept stopping him. One limb, he would say, moving Breck's hands on the saw. Leave the rest. The tree will be here next spring. Whether you're patient enough to let it do its work is the only question. Breck would set his jaw and start over. She passed his row one November afternoon and saw him standing with the pole, sawed down at his side, looking up into a young tree he had been working on completely still. She thought for a moment he was quitting, that the familiar restlessness had gotten the better of him, and he was about to walk back down the hill. Then she understood that he was not quitting. He was thinking. He was studying the tree the way you study a problem you are trying to solve on its own terms rather than yours, looking for where the next cut wanted to be instead of where he wanted to put it. It was a small thing. For Breck Caldwell, standing in that grove with a saw in his hand for the first time in his life, it was the whole mountain. She did not say anything. She kept walking. The seedlings had been on her mind since she first found the propagation bed behind the shack. Desmond had started a bed there in his last good autumn, 200 little walnut seedlings, in careful rows nursed up from nuts he had gathered off the best trees in the lower grove. They had gone weedy in the months since his death, but they were alive, and she and Wren had spent several evenings in September potting them up at the shack's workbench, Merritt helping on the strong days, sorting and watering with a seriousness that the work seemed to bring out in him naturally. When she had more seedlings than the grove could absorb, she loaded 2 flats into the truck and drove to the county elementary school. She stood in front of a 4th grade class she did not know and held up a seedling no taller than a pencil and told them the truth about it, which was that none of them would live to see it full grown. That a black walnut tree takes longer than a human lifespan to reach the height and maturity of the trees in the Desmond Caldwell Grove. That the tree they planted today would shade children who had not been born yet and might pay for someone's education in a family none of them would ever meet. A boy in the back row raised his hand. Then why plant it, he said. It was the fair question. The same question the timber buyer had asked her grandfather in the grove 15 years ago, and the same question she had been turning over in different forms since she first walked through that gate in April. Because somebody planted the ones we have, she said, and they never met us either. The class planted their seedlings along the back fence of the schoolyard that afternoon, one each with their names on small wooden stakes pressed into the dirt beside them. Nora drove home with the empty flats in the truck bed and Burl's chin on her thigh, and she felt hollowed out in the particular way that comes from giving something away that needed to be given, that was always meant to be given, that became more itself in the giving. She understood driving home through the November county with the bare fields on either side of the road and the sky going dark ahead of her, what her grandfather had been doing all those quiet evenings when he came back to the house with mud on his boots and that satisfied look that he never explained. He had been planting for people he would never meet. It was the closest thing to permanence that a person with a pocket knife and a handful of nuts and the patience to come back to the same ground season after season could reach. And he had reached it one tree at a time, behind a gate nobody thought to open. Arden knew a woodworker who had a slab from one of the first cut trees, and the man routed the letters in by hand over the course of a week, working slowly the way the wood deserved. Dark walnut on dark walnut, the grain of the carved letters continuous with the grain of the board, subtle and exactly right. Calden set the post on a cold February morning, the three of them standing at the gate in their coats, while the concrete set around the bases. The sign said Desmond Caldwell Grove. Nothing else, no dates, no explanation. Just the name and the wood he had grown on the ground, he had tended at the gate he had locked behind himself every evening for 50 years. People from town started driving out to look at it as the word spread through Garner County, the way it always spread gradually and then all at once. They pushed through the brush at the gate and came out into the grove and went quiet among the rows, the way people go quiet in old churches and in the presence of trees that have been standing longer than anyone present has been alive, which Nora had come to understand were not entirely different experiences. They took their caps off without thinking about it. They walked the lanes slowly and put their hands on the trunks and looked up into the crowns and did not say much for a while. And when they finally spoke, they said the same thing every time. I drove past this my whole life, they said. I never knew. She told them what Arden had told her that first morning standing in the oldest section by the shack. She told them that her grandfather had known to the inch what he had and had grown it where nobody would look and had asked for nothing back from it and had left it to the one who would love it the slow way. When they asked her whether she was angry at her brothers for taking everything else and leaving her the part nobody wanted, she told them the only true answer she had found. They took everything they could see, she said. He left me everything that mattered. I got the better end of it by a mile, and I didn't even know enough to want it. That's the part I still can't entirely get over. He knew me better than I knew myself. The following April, 1 year to the month from the morning, Burl had led her to that rusted gate. Nora and Wren and Calden and Breck and Merritt climbed to the top of the hill together. The day was clear and cold, and the light came across the ridge from the east at the low angle of early morning, laying long gold bars between the trunks all the way down the slope, and making the grove look from up here at the top like something that had been arranged by a hand larger than one man's. They carried a flat of seedlings between them, the last of what Desmond had started in his final good autumn. 38 little walnuts in their individual pots, and they carried trowels. And they walked up through all the sections of the grove past the enormous old trees of the lower slope, where the first cut had taken 30 and left 300 more, past the middle section, where Wren's row stood, and Breck was slowly and perfectly learning the names of trees he was beginning to care about, all the way up to the top of the hill where the young trees thinned out into open ground. This was where Desmond had stopped. The last rows he had planted were here, the thinnest trunks no wider than a man's wrist, the newest addition to the long conversation he had been conducting across time with people he would never meet. Beyond them, the ground was cleared and leveled and open, the soil turned and waiting. The way a man leaves ground he fully intends to come back to and does not. He did not come back to it. They set the flat down at the edge of the open ground, and they knelt in the soil, all 5 of them, and they began to plant. Merritt worked with the focused seriousness of a child who has recently survived something enormous and understands in a way that only that kind of experience teaches that what he is doing with his hands right now matters. He pressed each seedling into the turned earth, carefully tamping the soil around the roots, the way Nora showed him, moving from one to the next without rushing. When he had planted 5, he sat back on his heels and looked down the hill at the grove below them. The whole sweep of it, visible from here all the way down to the shack, and the gate, and the screen of brush at the road. Grandpa Desmond never saw these trees grown, Merritt said. He said it as a statement of fact, working something out that had been sitting in him since the first time he walked the grove. No, Nora said, but he planted them anyway. He planted every tree on this hillside knowing he would never see them full grown, she said. That was the whole idea. Merritt thought about that with the enormous seriousness of a child confronting an idea bigger than anything in his previous experience. So who gets them, he said. When they're ready, Nora looked at this boy 8 years old and newly returned from the worst year of his life, crouching in the April dirt at the top of the hill with his hands dark with soil. And she thought about what her grandfather had written in the oldest notebook about the grandchildren. He was never going to meet about the people who would tend these trees and eventually cut them down long after everyone on this hill was gone. Maybe nobody cuts them, she said. Maybe they just get to be the oldest trees on the hill someday. The biggest ones, the ones that were here the longest. Merritt considered this with complete seriousness and then nodded, satisfied with it, and picked up his trowel and moved to the next hole. Breck was working the far end of the row. He was not fast and he was not graceful about it, and twice he had to ask Wren which way to angle the root ball, and he got it wrong the first time and had to take the seedling back out and start over with it. But he stayed on his knees in the cold April dirt, and he worked one seedling at a time, not looking at how many remained in the flat, just at the one directly in front of him. Calden worked steadily beside Nora without talking much, which was how he had always been most useful. When he was not getting in the way, and the row grew behind them as the morning light shifted, and the long shadows of the existing trees shortened on the open ground around them, and the air began to carry a little warmth in it. When the last seedling was in the ground, Nora sat back on her heels and looked at what they had made. 40 little trees in a line as straight as the old man would have wanted, running along the top of the hill where his grove would keep climbing long after every person on this hill was gone from it. Not one of them would live to see these trees fully grown. She knew that kneeling there with her grandfather's grafting knife in her jacket pocket and her daughter beside her and her brothers both on their knees in the dirt, at last doing the only work the grove had ever asked of anyone, which was to show up and pay attention and take one thing at a time. He had known the same thing about every tree he ever planted on this hillside. Every single one of them, going all the way back to the first rows he put in when he was young enough to believe he might see them mature and old enough to understand he probably wouldn't. And he had put them in the ground anyway, season after season, because the planning was the point, because the whole secret of a thing done right was that you did it for the people coming after you and not for the satisfaction of seeing it finished. She pressed the last seedling into the soil and firmed the earth around it with both hands the way he had shown her before she was tall enough to see over the propagation bench. And she stood up slowly and looked back down the long slope at 50 years of his patience, standing green and enormous in the April light. Row after row after row of it, going all the way down to the shack and the corner post where the tin box had waited in the ground, and the gate and the curtain of brush at the road that hid all of it from every person who had driven past without knowing what they were driving past. Burl had made it up the hill. She had not been sure he would manage it anymore, but he had slow and deliberate, one careful step at a time, and he stood at the end of the new row with his gray muzzle lifted into the morning breeze, reading whatever the air told him. The same thing he had always been reading on every walk up, every lane of this grove since he was young enough to run it, too. She whistled for him softly, and he came to her, and she walked back down through the grove with the empty flat under her arm and the old dog at her side, and the whole long Tennessee morning coming alive around them in the trees her grandfather had left her. Behind her, she heard her daughter's voice and her brother's voices, and Merritt's lighter, younger voice among them, talking about something she couldn't quite make out from down the slope. And then the sound of all of them beginning to come down the hill together through the grove, their boots finding the short grass of the mowed lanes, the sound of a family learning to move through a place that had been waiting for all of them longer than any of them had known to look for it. The gate at the bottom stood open in the morning light. The sign above it held the name in the wood he had grown patient and plain and built to last. She did not look back at it when she passed through. She already knew what it said.